Next July, James Gunn's Superman will be released to theaters, and that film is declared by James Gunn as the true beginning of the DC universe. After loving both the Guardians of the Galaxy movies and the Suicide Squad, I have complete faith in James Gunn that he will create a great and superior DC universe compared to the DCEU. Now, what are my thoughts on the DCEU as a whole? I thought it was a complete mess. It was very inconsistent, disorganized. Some of them had poorly told stories. Thought it had potential for something great, but it was just wasted. And it's not too much of a surprise that it went nowhere and it's getting rebooted. And it's just a shame they didn't really have that much of a plan of where they want to take this universe. While not without its bright spots and a few good films here and there, most of their films range from okay to absolutely terrible. And now that the DCEU has come to a close last year, I've decided to do two lists of the DCEU, my best films of the DCEU, my favorites, and my least favorites, the worst of the DCEU. Before I want to get started on the list, just want to say right out of the way, this list is entirely subjective and it's just my opinion. If you enjoy any of these movies on the list and found them entertaining, that's great. I am really happy that you found more to appreciate about these movies than I did. They just didn't do it for me in the end and left me dissatisfied. And I'm excited to hear your picks for your worst DCEU movies. Do you have a top 5 like I do, or your number 1 pick? Let me know in the comments below. And before we get into the top 5 list, I have 3 dishonorable mentions. First one, really let me down, Shazam! Fury of the Gods. A very disappointing sequel that lacked what made that predecessor so fresh and exciting. While not without its fun action scenes and likable performances, the emotional core wasn't as strong and it felt rushed and hollow. Weak villains and a ridiculous cop-out ending that left a bad taste in my mouth. And it was such a shame. I was so excited for it, and it was one of the biggest box office bombs of last year, and it was just a forgettable superhero sequel. Second dishonorable mention, another box office bomb from last year, The Flash. Now, I am aware this is a divisive movie. You either enjoy this movie, found it to be a fun time, mixed bag, or just really don't like it or hate it. I did not like this movie at all, and it gets worse and worse the more I think about it. While the two bright spots, Michael Keaton's Batman, great to see him back, and Sasha Kal-El as Supergirl, underdeveloped, but she did good for what she had to work with. But this movie was just messy, unfunny, unexciting, almost annoying, and I didn't really find this movie that entertaining. And the visual effects, oh my god, don't even get me started. They look so ugly, unappealing, obviously rushed. I just seriously can't believe these effects were approved. Like, oh my god, these are just absolutely atrocious effects, especially in the climax. And after watching this movie, I am really sick of Ezra Miller as the Flash. I may hate him as a person and I want to enjoy this movie, but I really hope we get a better Flash movie in the DC universe and hopefully a better actor for that role. And final dishonorable mention was close to making my top 5 list, Wonder Woman 1984. This sequel was a huge step down after the great predecessor was so exciting and put the DCEU on the right track. And after many delays due to the pandemic, it was just not worth the wait. While Pedro Pascal as Maxwell Lord was the best part about the film, it was just a messy and ridiculous sequel. And the story, I was like, was this really the best story they had for this sequel? And I did not like how they brought back Steve Trevor. And just watching that scene, I was like, that's how you bring him back? Seriously? And I did not like Kristen Wiig as Cheetah. I thought she was miscast in the role. And worst of all, the sequel was boring and the second act really dragged. The first Wonder Woman film was a great solo film. I loved it, but the sequel, it was quite bad. And those dishonorable mentions out of the way, now on to the top 5 list. Coming in at number 5 is Black Adam. I saw a lot of potential for a standalone Black Adam movie, and you had promising source material with a character like that, and maybe Dwayne Johnson could do something really good in the role. This standalone movie could bring a lot to the table for the DCEU, but instead, it was as boring, generic, and lifeless as the DCEU can get. For the positives, I do like Lauren Ball's theme for it, I do like his score for Mission Impossible Fallout, and I do like Pierce Brosnan as Dr. Fate. I thought he was the best character in the film. And there are a few enjoyable action scenes here and there, especially when Black Adam escapes from his tomb. That's about it. This movie kind of sucked. It was just an uninteresting and generic story with barely any stakes. The villain is awful, generic, been there, done that, just a boring by the numbers villain. Dull performances from the cast and the slow motion of it was so overused. Don't even get me started. And when characters are fighting like It's just like, stop with the freaking slow motion already. And as for my thoughts on the mid-credit scene with Superman, at first I was like, hey, Superman, cool. And what did that lead to? Nothing! Yeah, that mid-credit scene is pointless now. Given how this movie got negative reviews and underperformed at the box office, it was such a shame how much wasted potential this was. It was just a bland, formulaic, forgettable, and disposable addition to the DCEU. Coming in at number 4 is Batman v Superman: Dawn of Justice. I truly believe this film represents everything that went wrong with the DCEU. This film is the exact definition of a bloated mess. We could have had a really compelling Batman and Superman movie if it was built up to more and wasn't rushed. It could have been exhilarating and compelling, but instead, what we got was a dull, boring, melodramatic, particularly overstuffed and incohesive movie. For my pros, I do think Ben Affleck does a decent job as Batman. He's not among my favorite Batmans, but he did try with what he could with a weak script. And I do like Jeremy Irons as Alfred. The effects are good, and I do like the warehouse action scene with Batman, but that's about it. By far, my biggest problem with Batman v Superman is the overstuffed story that's trying to do way too much and focusing on setup for the future of the DCEU that it forgot to be an entertaining and engaging movie on its own. This movie tries to be a sequel to Man of Steel, The Dark Knight Returns, introducing Wonder Woman, introducing the Justice League, and also trying to be a Batman vs Superman movie and doing the death of Superman that it becomes very excessive and frustrating. I really wish there was someone at Warner Brothers when Zack Snyder was trying to do much. Someone should have tapped him on the shoulder. It was like, less is more. Henry Cavill did a really good job as Superman in Man of Steel, but here, it was a step down. It was such a dull and wooden performance that he spends most of the film just brooding that made me feel less attached to his Superman. I feel like that might be the fault of Zack Snyder's direction, not really giving him much to do. And the rest of the performances are either dull or lifeless. And one particular performance that ruins this film for me, Jesse Eisenberg as Lex Luthor. Now, I do want to say this. I think Jesse Eisenberg is a great actor. I thought he did a phenomenal job as Mark Zuckerberg in The Social Network, and I liked him in other movies such as Zombieland and Now You See Me. But here, though, this is one of the biggest, and I mean biggest, superhero movie miscasts I have ever seen. His performance was irritating, way over the top, and tonally out of place. And not only that, it just felt like a very wishy-washy portrayal of Lex Luthor. I just have a hard time understanding where he's coming from, what he has against Superman, and what is he really about. I don't blame Jesse Eisenberg because he clearly looked like he was enjoying the role, but I probably blame Snyder's direction and the screenplay for an absolutely terrible portrayal of Lex Luthor. And Nicholas Hoult, great actor. I'm excited he got cast as Lex Luthor. I'm hoping he does a better job next year. One thing I hate about this movie was how it made Batman kill people. It just felt like they misunderstood the character of Batman and why he doesn't kill or use guns. As much as Batman is an intimidating presence, he wouldn't go down the same path as criminals to use guns or become one of them. And in here, Batman kills people and he uses the Batmobile to use guns and shoot people in one action scene? Are you serious? And another thing I found ridiculous, Batman brands people with the bat symbol? What the hell? I'm just not a fan of how Zack Snyder made this Batman. It just did not work for me. And one aspect before the ending I do want to talk about, the Martha scene. I don't think it's a bad idea on paper, but it was poorly executed. I think Batman and Superman moms having the same name could work, but how it was handled here, but it was just so cheesy, corny, melodramatic, and it just felt like, really, that's how the fight comes to an end? And for the third act, after a bloated fight scene and shoehorning in Doomsday, I hated how they rushed the death of Superman. You seriously kill off Superman 2 movies in, and you didn't really focus on him or develop him that much to truly earn that moment. Imagine if in Iron Man 2, they decide to kill off Iron Man and get to the Avengers already. Who are these other characters? We'll just try to develop them as much as we could, so let's just get to the Avengers already. And it honestly felt predictable that Superman was gonna come back at the end of the movie, the final shot with the dirt on the coffin, and the coffin comes up. I was like, I don't really see that much tension. Superman's gonna come back anyway. And I did not like how this movie just teased the Justice League. I was like, you're getting the Justice League already. Wonder Woman seriously checks her emails for the Justice League cameos. It's like, there's gonna be a Justice League movie. You should take more time with these characters, give them solo movies before the Justice League. That's why the MCU and the Infinity Saga work so well. They took their time with these characters, Iron Man, Captain America, Hulk, and Thor, and give them solo movies and understand their origins before the Avengers. It was exciting to see them come together as a team. But here it just felt like they're rushing everything to compete with Marvel. I get this movie is polarizing. You either still enjoy this movie, found it to be a mixed bag, or just hate this movie. I did not like this movie at all, and it just left me dissatisfied, and it's just a very frustrating movie. Coming in at number 3 is Aquaman and the Lost Kingdom, the final DCEU movie. This was the final nail in the coffin for the DCEU, and it just felt like a complete shrug. I admit I did not want to see this movie at all. I thought the trailer looked awful. Now, having seen the movie on Max recently, it was actually a lot worse than I thought it was going to be. For the positives, I do think Jason Momoa, Patrick Wilson, and Yahya Abdul-Mateen II try to do what they can to elevate some charm out of this movie, and there is one fight scene between Aquaman and Black Manta I thought was kinda cool. Other than that, this was terrible. The story is not engaging and paper thin, with minimal emotional stakes to get attached to. The visual effects are just artificial and took me out of the movie several times. And knowing from the opening scene that features Aquaman riding a seahorse to fight some bad guys, and I can just tell the green screen behind Jason Momoa, I was like, oh, the green screen is gonna stick out like a Thor's thumb, isn't it? And there is so much obvious green screen in this movie, I just got distracted. I just feel like I'm looking at actors standing in front of a green screen. And when Aquaman was giving a speech by the end of the movie, some of the green screen looked terrible. The performances just feel like they're going through the motions, doing whatever they can. Black Manta had so much potential for a cool and compelling villain I wanted more from in the first movie, but here he just felt underused again to another generic villain. I do think Yahya Abdul-Mateen II is a great actor, especially in Trial of Chicago 7, he was great in that film, but they just given him pretty poor material to work with. The humor was just cringy, awkward, and unfunny. I didn't really laugh at all. And the ending was just a ridiculous Iron Man ripoff, where in the first Iron Man, when Tony Stark revealed his identity, that did make sense, and it was quite surprising. I was like, wow, he revealed his identity. That was so cool. But here it was just like, didn't some people already know he was Aquaman? This doesn't really seem like a huge deal. Oh, and the mid-credits scene. If you haven't seen this movie yet, this is not really a huge spoiler, it's just something ridiculous. King Orm seriously takes a cockroach, puts it on a burger, and eats it. That's how the DCEU ends, eating a cockroach on a burger. There really was no sense of finality. I was like, that's how you end it all? Are you kidding me? As someone who thought the first Aquaman, it was quite divisive, I just think it's an okay middle-of-the-road superhero movie. That was a bit style over substance for me, but this was a terrible sequel, and honestly one of the worst superhero sequels I've seen in a long time. The story is not engaging, the performances are dull, the effects aren't really that appealing. There was no sense of finality for this being the final DCU movie. And overall, the DCU ended on a huge whimper. Coming in at number 2 is Justice League from 2017. Now, back in 2017, what was my original grade for this movie? Yeah, I gave Justice League a 3 out of 5 when I first saw it. And now, 2024, what is my current grade for this movie? Yeah, this movie got worse and worse over the years, and especially after seeing the Snyder Cut, this movie is horrible, lifeless, unfunny, unentertaining, and extremely rushed, boring movie. And Zack Snyder did step away from this movie in early 2017 when his daughter tragically passed away, and I do respect his decision, and it's really sad what happened to Autumn. I truly believe Joss Whedon should have been brought in because him and Snyder's visions are completely different. Whenever I watched this movie, I thought, this does not feel like Zack Snyder's vision. This is a completely different movie. And the 2-hour runtime mandate Decision by Warner Brothers was very poor and terrible. Rushing the story, not enough time for engaging character development or story to get invested in. I feel like this is the Justice League movie. You should have a bit of a longer runtime than just approximately 2 hours. Especially when 3 of those characters haven't had solo movies yet. You're just rushing in, it was like, here's Flash, here's Aquaman, here's Cyborg. They're teaming up, let's get Steppenwolf. Oh, and speaking of which, Steppenwolf is such a bore of a villain. Talk about the most boring, generic, dull, and uninteresting comic book villain you can get. His design looks like a video game, and you just wasted an incredible talent of Kieran Hines. And it's another shame after watching the Snyder Cut, Steppenwolf actually is given a motivation and more of a character than just another generic villain. And here, he's nothing. He's just a nothing villain here. The performances are just bad. Ben Affleck looks bored and disinterested every time he's on screen. Gal Gadot was just bland compared to her solo movie. And Ezra Miller, he got on my nerves as the Flash in this movie. I didn't really find him that funny. Jason Momoa as Aquaman and Ray Fisher as Cyborg, they're trying, but they're just bland as well. And it's another shame that many of Cyborg's scenes got cut in the Whedon cut when Zack Snyder said that Cyborg was the heart of the movie, and after seeing Zack Snyder's Justice League, he was right. He was the most interesting character of the film, and shame he wasn't given a solo movie. Cyborg was the most interesting, fleshed out character, the most heartfelt character, and Ray Fisher did a great job in Zack Snyder's Justice League, and here, it was just wasted. And the CGI, for a movie that cost $300 million, is abysmal. It is just so unappealing, rushed, and artificial. It's a constant green screen and the color palette, and it just looks a little kiddie and jokey compared to Snyder's vision. And about the CGI, Henry Cavill's upper lip. And for those who don't know, Henry Cavill had a mustache when he was filming Mission Impossible Fallout, better movie by the way, and I think it was Paramount that wouldn't let Henry Cavill shave it off. Just in time for reshoots, they had to remove it with CGI, and just the opening shot of Superman, oh, it looked bad. Another scene followed by that forced callback of "Do you bleed?" line. That's like, that's just so distracting. I feel bad for Henry Cavill, who had such great promise as a perfect Superman, but it's just a shame he was given these movies and what he had to work with. It is sad, with all this anticipation for a Justice League movie on the big screen, this was what we got. And I do plan on talking about Zack Snyder's Justice League in the best DCEU movies, and this movie, 7 years later, aged like milk. And number 1, I think the worst DCEU movie, in my opinion, is Suicide Squad. I am extremely disappointed all these years later for how much potential Suicide Squad truly had. A promising cast, a talented director at the helm with David Ayer, who made a great movie before End of Watch. Please check that film out. And the trailers were awesome, especially the one with Bohemian Rhapsody in it. I remember being pumped for this movie back in 2016. I was like, this movie's gonna be awesome. And then I watched the movie. I was underwhelmed. Similar experience with Justice League. I was like, yeah, it was fine. And now, I think this movie is absolutely terrible. Even if Will Smith as Deadshot and Margot Robbie as Harley Quinn try to elevate some charm into this movie, and I do like El Diablo and his character, this movie was a complete mess. The visual effects are mediocre and don't really have much noteworthy about them. The action is just generic and tensionless and forgettable. And the dialogue, whether it was just annoying quips or dialogue that's just poorly delivered and awkward, and the terrible dialogue in this movie is just almost obnoxious. When the Joker was like, "I'm an idea, show don't tell. This is Katana, she's got my back. I would advise not getting killed by her. The sword traps her souls of the victims." And some of Harley Quinn's one-liners, "What is that perfume? The stench of death, or that's a killer app." Ugh. Some of the dialogue in this movie just annoys the crap out of me. While there's some of the cast you can tell are invested and are trying to make a good movie, but the worst actor in this film, Jared Leto as the Joker, still to this date, by far the worst portrayal of the Joker on film. And I was excited that Jared Leto, a great actor, was going to be playing the Joker, and I was all in for a new, fresh, and interesting take on the character, and it was poorly executed. And the main thing that ruined this Joker is Jared Leto's abysmal acting, and he was just overdoing it. It was like, look at me, I'm crazy, I'm the Joker, and it was just a very one-dimensional and surface-level portrayal of the Joker. He was just annoying, overdoing it, and he kind of felt pointless in this movie. He doesn't really contribute that much to the story or progress things along. You can just cut him out of the story and you really wouldn't change that much, honestly. And there could have been an interesting solo movie between Harley Quinn and Joker, but those scenes felt rushed, underdeveloped, and just glossed over. And I really hope this October that Joker Folie Do, which looks amazing by the way, I am pumped for that movie, and I hope that is more of the Joker and Harley Quinn movie that we're expecting to see. And the villain in this movie, what we got, the Enchantress, she was just a goofy and not threatening villain at all. And in the climax of this movie, which was such a bloated mess, she was just like, and I couldn't take her seriously at all. And the story in this movie was just all over the place. Tries to be this Suicide Squad, fun, action-packed movie. Then you got the Enchantress. Then you got Harley Quinn's backstory with the Joker. And it's just a jumbled mess. And the first half of this movie was just skimming characters out of the way. Here's what this squad member is about. Here's this squad member, and this squad member, and this squad member. And not really much of an emotional attachment to them, just making them a one-dimensional group of characters. I did not like how the soundtrack was handled in this movie. It was all over the place. It just felt like, here's this song, here's this song. You like this song? Here's that song, and that song, and that song. And whenever some of these songs were playing, I was like, does this song really fit the scene? Or this just kind of feels out of place and you could just cut that song. And what ruined this movie, what I could tell, was studio interference, the disastrous editing in this movie. It doesn't really flow from scene to scene or progress the story in an engaging way, and it was just way too choppy. It is honestly some of the worst film editing I've ever seen in a comic book movie. Overall, 8 years later, I am still disappointed by Suicide Squad. We had potential for something better, but it just wasn't there. It's such a shame there was so much studio interference in this movie, and it didn't feel like entirely David Ayer's vision. Just such an awful superhero movie that's one of my least favorite films of 2016, and I think it's the worst film in the DCEU. And some were saying this was trying to be DC's Guardians of the Galaxy, and who would have thought that 5 years later, we would get the director of the Guardians of the Galaxy movies to do another Suicide Squad movie, and we got that. And the Suicide Squad, I can't wait to talk about more of this awesomeness in my favorite DCEU movies. And that is my list of my top 5 worst DCEU movies. While not without its high moments, the low moments are really, really bad. And it was such a shame it ended up being a messy and disorganized cinematic universe. And I really do hope, James Gunn, I love your films, love your superhero films. You've done a great job with both Marvel and DC. I can't wait to see Superman. And on another more positive note, I will be writing my draft for my favorite DCEU movies. That list will be coming soon. So I would like to hear from you guys. What are your least favorite films in the DCEU? Bottom 5 or your number 1 pick? Let me know in the comments below. Did you guys enjoy seeing this top 5 list and want to see more videos like this in the future? If yes, please hit that like and subscribe button if you're new here. And don't forget that notification bell for my next upload in the future. It really means a lot. All my social media links will be in the description down below. You can find me on Twitter, Instagram, and TikTok. And if you want to see more of my written reviews, I do have a Letterboxd account, so if you'd like to follow me on there as well. And until the next video, I'm Jack Benner, and look forward to another movie review.